a WFSB Plus original. This is the Capitol Rundown.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Capitol Rundown, where we explore the politics that matter to you from both sides of the aisle from our insiders. I'm Kara Sundlin, and for the Republicans, we have Themis Claridis, former House Republican leader, and Jimmy Tickey, a Democratic strategist. So much to talk to about this week, guys. So let's get right to it. Let's start with the strikes on Iran. Thank you both for being here. Certainly, we have words coming from both sides of the aisle. And the big question, was it right to strike? And what is the end game? Themis, let's start with you.
Well, I mean, first, let me say, I think we all, are thankful to our troops and what they're given this country, and the loss of lives that will horribly, probably continue to happen. And our thoughts and prayers to their families, and again, thanks to them. But, I'll get to the end game in a second, but here's the bottom line. After, we see all these news reports, we read all this information, we get all this intel. The bottom line is this: the United States asked for three basic things: no nukes now and in the future, no more missiles, and no more state-sponsored terrorism through yourself or through proxies, right? Very simple. And those are things, that's not Republican, that's not Democrat. That's because Iran hates us. They hate the Americans. They want us dead. They want our allies dead. They're clear, right? They're clear about their issues. So those are things that were asked for. And all these negotiations, from what I've heard and who I've talked to, they would get maybe 80% there, 90% there. The next day, they'd be back at 50%. They would never agree to it. They would never agree to it. So whereas all of us can negotiate and figure out, okay, well, I'll take this and you'll take that, and we can walk away understanding we all got something, they don't operate like that because they hate us. So at a certain point, you have to do something about it, or else you look weak. And so taking out the Ayatollah was the only option here. And as far as what's the end game was taking out the Ayatollah so you can give Iran an opportunity now to do something about it and make their country better and safer. Because the end game is not what's going to happen after. The end game was we did what we needed to do. I mean, that was our goal.
Yet President Trump saying today, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth saying, we're just getting started. So, Jimmy, there are Democrats who are upset about this, who think that there's no clear objective. And at least of yesterday's polling, a lot of Americans concerned as well. What's your take?
Sure. There is really no clear objective, and we don't really know what the end game is, because from the moment that President Trump came out on Truth Social with a very brief video, it's really changed. Why did he do this? First, it was about that there was some imminent threat, but now there's public reporting from members of Congress and senators who have said there really was no imminent threat. Even Secretary Rubio has changed his tune, first saying there was an imminent threat, many saying now there wasn't. There was some conversations around they want a regime change, but when you take out one bad guy, often what we've seen in situations like this is that there's another bad guy right behind them. And we've never really been able to have a regime change when you have airstrikes or from the air. That requires boots on the ground, and I don't think there is a real appetite from Americans to add boots on the ground in Iran. So I don't even think this administration knows exactly what the reason was and what the end game is. We've now lost 6 American lives, and we need to hear more from this administration. And when you make these sort of attacks, and as President Trump called it a war, you need to have Congress at the table. And so there will be a voting of war powers in the House and the Senate later this week, because Congress needs to be at the table. It's Article 1 of the Constitution that if there is going to be these sort of strikes and this kind of war, that now Congress needs to be involved with intelligence, members need to be briefed, and if we are going to go through with this, we need to have members of Congress at the table. It is not solely up to a president to declare war.
Do you think Congress needs to get involved, Themis?
Well, a couple things. As far as imminent threat goes, that is defined in a lot of different ways. The argument for there's no imminent threat is they don't have long-range missiles that they can just shoot from Iran and take us out, right? The imminent threat is they have state-sponsored terrorism, and through their proxies, whether it's Israel or Saudi Arabia, who we rely on for a lot of oil, or any of our bases, our American bases in all these countries, to me, that is an imminent threat. They are going after us, and they're not shy about it, right? They've refused to agree to no nukes, no missiles, and no more state-sponsored terrorism. That is an imminent threat. Okay, number one. Number two, the War Powers Act. Clinton didn't seem to care about the War Powers Act, and Obama didn't when he went into Libya, and Clinton went into Kosovo. And we also have 60 days before they, when you go into a country to bring Congress in. They have been briefed. The Gang of Eight, which is like the top leaders, have all been briefed. The one criticism I do have is the communication and the messaging of all this. I mean, Jimmy's right. You know, the president came out and said one thing, and then Hegseth said another thing, and Rubio said another thing. You know, being in politics or, you know, being in media, you know, messaging is the most important thing. People need to understand. I mean, if you went out to the American people and you said, from the moment this happened, we've been in negotiations with them for months and years. We had presidents for 47 years that I would argue should have done this a long time ago, Republican and Democrat presidents. We asked for no more missiles, no more nukes, and no more state-sponsored terrorism. These are not things, again, that American citizens would think are crazy things. They refuse to do it. So we had to do something. And the answer is, if another bad guy comes in, then you do the same thing to them. I mean, this is what you have to do, because all of the stuff that we've done along the way with Iran has really weakened them. They are much weaker than they used to be, but they still hate us and want us dead. So how do you handle that? You just say, okay, well, we'll just have another conversation next week. They don't respond to that.
So, Jimmy, last thing, maybe before we move on to another topic, do you see this as, we've done it, allies, where do we need to go to finish it?
Well, it's hard to say what we do to finish it since we don't know all the particulars around what the situation we're in right now. I mean, if you're saying that we needed to do this to go after their nuclear weapons, last summer when Trump made strikes, he said at that point they were completely obliterated. So was that not the case? So it's hard to discern with this president and with Pete Hegseth, who is the Secretary of Defense, or the Secretary of War as he calls it, where exactly we're at. But Congress being at the table, having these intelligence briefings, and having cooler heads be able to see where we go from here. You know, this, even the president has said, this could be very open-ended. This could be a while. There will be more American deaths. I just don't think people want to hear that. And so while we want democracy to prevail around the world, we also need to realize that actions like this also have consequences. And getting involved like this in the Middle East has never fared very well for us. And so we need people who have actually some intelligence around the table to make these sorts of decisions, and not simply Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth.
Before the Iranian strikes, certainly the biggest thing in the news cycle was the Epstein files. And some have gone as far to criticize that this is the reason that we're going to war with other countries like Iran, is to distract from the Epstein files. This week, we had Bill and Hillary testify. And I want to start with you, Jimmy. Do you think, first of all, did anything to do with Iran from the Democratic perspective? Was it to get away from the Epstein files, or is it a distraction, or is that timing coincidental? And what do we need to do about the Epstein files now?
Well, certainly Donald Trump wants to talk about anything and everything other than the Epstein files. That has always been the case. And let's not forget, there was not an interest to release the Epstein files until Congress actually got involved. And that did become bipartisan in forcing the release of the Epstein files with the Transparency Act that forced this Department of Justice, who was protecting Donald Trump, to release these files. And it has been a mixed bag of what they have released. Many times redacted, some pages missing. Who's mentioned in the reports more than Donald Trump? So I do think there's a lot of distractions, but we've seen that before with Donald Trump, with many other areas as well. He certainly is continuing that as anything else but to talk about the Epstein files. Look, the Clintons were asked to come in. They wanted a public hearing, because if they were going to offer this testimony, they wanted everyone to hear it at the same time. That was not afforded to them by the House majority, so they went and had their separate depositions. They later were released on video, but we did see a Congresswoman Boebert who was, maybe posting a video or posting a picture, and it just calls into question the rules. You all come together to say, these are the rules we're going to play by, and you're going to have this deposition, and then when you break the rules, it really makes it difficult to say, why are we even negotiating at all? You had the Clintons willing to come in, first Secretary Hillary Clinton and then President Clinton, and they provided their depositions fully. And you know what? For them to depose a former president and a former Secretary of the State, I think if this committee was serious, they would call in Donald Trump and see what he knows on the record.
Demis?
Well, I just think they need to release the files and obviously redact for minors and people that need to be redacted for. I think once the files come out, as they should, then people can make a decision on what they're reading in it. Do you need to go further and bring the president before the committee to ask more questions? But I don't think you have all the information until all the files are out.
I mean, the government is certainly saying it has released millions and millions of pages, and that's all there is to see, essentially, is what we're seeing.
Right, but that's not all of them, so, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, there are millions of pages that have been released, and that's great. That's still not all of them.
So moving on to how any of this between Iran, the Epstein files, and so many things that are going on, we also have midterms coming up, and the Texas primaries are happening. Are they a bellwether for the midterms, Themis?
Well, it was so interesting, right, from both our sides, because there was a United States Senate Democrat primary and United States Senate Republican primary in Texas. Now, as we all know, Texas is a pretty Republican state, but it started to shift a little bit as time goes on, and U.S. Senator John Cornyn was being primaried by the Attorney General, Paxton, and then a third person. And all the polls were saying, I mean, this is why we talk about polls and how polls, sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're not. All the polls were saying that Paxton was going to win. And Paxton is a very flawed candidate, in my opinion. I mean, he has had all sorts of crisis and scandal and all sorts of things. And the president did not endorse either one, because he said, they're both my friends and I'm not going to get in the middle of this. But the argument is that Cornyn, who is, it's Texas, so they're pretty to the right of center, but he didn't really, kiss the ring enough for the president. But he didn't endorse Paxton, and every poll said Paxton was going to win, and Cornyn won. But in Texas, they have the runoff law, so unless somebody gets 50% plus one, which neither one of them did, they have to have a runoff election in a few months. So that's how that will go. And then, Jasmine Crockett, who's a sitting congresswoman who got into the race late, she actually lost by a lot.
Yeah, for the Democrats.
Right.
So I think I read that it's been at least 30 years since a Democrat has won a statewide Texas election.
Well, we're working on it.
But tell me if I'm wrong. But you guys are hoping it's Paxton.
Well,
I would be hoping, if I were a Democrat, because he is so controversial, that I would want him to win, which is why the Republicans in Texas, if anybody's watching, you should want Cornyn to win, because he's the more, establishment candidate. He has a record. He's represented Texas well. But that's why these things get crazy. Like, who wins a primary isn't always the best person to win the general election. As we've learned in Connecticut.
Paxton is flawed would be a kind statement to the Attorney General of Texas. But one day, Democrats are going to win Texas, and it would be great if it's this year. We have invested in Texas. We have had voter registration programs in Texas. We have really been on the ground for years. Some thought we could do it with Beto O'Rourke. We missed it, but time and time again, we keep party building. It's a huge state. Absolutely has trended more Republican, but significant efforts have been made in Texas, and so hopefully this is the year. I think what happened on the Republican side is really interesting, because you had Cornyn with a very MAGA Republican. He lost by a hair. They do go ahead to this runoff. But on the Democratic side, James Tallarico, who's a state representative, he actually cleared the 50%. So we're done on the Democratic side. We know our candidate is James Tallarico. Earlier this morning, Congresswoman Crockett did concede the race and call the winner, which is good. You want to see that unity. Either way, we knew this.
Because she was talking about that there were some voting irregularities at disenfranchisement.
And there were last night in
Dallas County, which is a huge county.
Yeah, it's her district. There was some confusion over where people vote, and they actually turned some people away and sent them to other polling locations. And so courts always err on the side of giving voter that opportunity to vote. So they kept the polling places open for a little longer, and that actually was in her congressional district. So she was probably really close to that and understood what was happening, and at first was concerned about voter disenfranchisement. But voters got to the polls, and James Tallarico did win pretty handedly. She did get into the race late, and she really made an appeal to her district and to African-American voters. James Tallarico seemed to really have a lot of rural voters supporting him, which is interesting when you look at Texas. He did very well among Hispanic voters, rural voters, and working-class voters. And you need that. You need that coalition to win in Texas.
Bottom line, you see this as a growth year for Democrats, even in places like Texas.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So if we move on to back here at home, actually, I want to go for Kristi Noem first. Let's talk about this, because yes, we have Kristi Noem testifying in front of Congress. We had Pam Bondi testifying in front of Congress for her reasons before. This is after 2 American citizens were killed by ICE agents. So as we see this, and there was talk yesterday that Kristi Noem was asked to apologize. Maybe that was just theater for these American citizens dying. Themis, actually, let me start with you. How is Kristi Noem doing, and does she make it, as people are calling for her resignation?
Well, she was actually asked to apologize for calling the 2 people that died domestic terrorists, which clearly was over the top, right? I mean, that was inappropriate. regardless of what you thought of their behavior going in, they weren't domestic terrorists.
But she wouldn't do that. She didn't want to
No, she wouldn't do it. Kristi Noem, let's remember, Kristi Noem and Pam Bondi serve at the pleasure of the president. So they, I mean, I won't say take direction from the president, but they are in the positions they're in because they were people that were very loyal to him. And there were people who had the same view, the same vision, the same idea of what government should look like and what we need to do in this country to make it a better place. And so they're going to operate the way he operates. And as long as they're doing that, he will keep them there. But the second Donald Trump believes that somebody is a liability to him, that's when he cuts them loose. So the question is going to be, he doesn't think so now because he has not gotten rid of her. But if he thinks that she is a liability to him, then he will cut her loose.
Will there be impeachment moves?
There's been talk about that in Congress. That really is rare and it's tough to do. I do agree. I think when things get to a fever pitch with this president, he'll then let the person go. I mean, Kristi Noem is not up to the job. She does not know what she's doing, and that says a lot when you look at many of the members of their cabinet. But you look at the loss of American life, and there's so many things I could say about her, but even for the Republicans that are watching that are always so concerned about how we spend our dollars as a government, she has spent $70 million on a jet that she travels around the country with. Take a look at it.
It apparently has a luxury bed.
A luxury bedroom, and she spent over $200 million, subverted the process to really have competitive bids for an ad that was widely seen across the country and in airports. I think it was $220 million for an ad that put herself forward. So the lavish spending that she has been a part of, not even following governmental processes, is just wrong. To put herself forward, to build her own name recognition, and even some Republicans have spoken out about that she is not about actually doing anything around homeland security or protecting people. If anything, we've seen what ICE has done has made that worse, and she's only about really advancing herself and her image.
Do you see her resigning or not finishing her term?
I think it would be welcome by the American people to not have her in this position.
All right, we'll see what happens with that as these testimonies continue. Also, we need to come back here at home because we've got a lot going on here. And Governor Lamont used some veto power on earmarks for local Connecticut nonprofits and things that are done. Demis, let me start with you. Why did the governor use his veto power, and where do we go from here?
Well, earmarks is a term used for certain amount of dollars that are put in budgets or put in bills to go, for the Kara fund or the Jimmy fund in his town and her town or my town. And, I'm like, I want to put a gazebo in my town, so can you put in $500,000 so I can get that? Those are earmarks,
some people
right?
call that pork.
It's safe. They're synonyms.
Okay.
And so there was the bigger problem here is that the reason he vetoed almost $4 million of these earmarks is because there was a session day last week for the House and the Senate in Connecticut where they did what they called an emergency certification bill. It is a way to usurp the process of public hearings and committee meetings. Now, sometimes it's necessary. I mean, if everybody remembers a few years back, we had a federal employee layoff. Federal employees weren't getting paid.
Yeah.
And we went in and we gave them some relief. All right, now that couldn't have waited 3 months till it went through a committee process and a public hearing. Emergency certifications are for things, bills and ideas that people will actually be hurt and there'll be damage done if they're not done immediately. These were not that. So this was what we call in politics a Christmas tree of $2.5 million for Hartford for a recreational thing, $500,000 for East Hartford for this, all sorts of money. But the bigger problem, and so that was just an abuse of power by the majority party in Connecticut. I mean, I'll be completely honest with you. A lot of those could have easily gone through the process. Would they have passed at the end? Maybe not, but there's a process for a reason. The reason why people don't trust government is because they're not doing things the right way. They're doing them in the dark of night. They're not doing them transparently, and that was part of the problem. But the governor, in his speech, when he put out his budget in February, when we were all up there on opening day, one of the things he said was he wants more transparency and checks and balances and protocol in place for these earmarks.
Yeah.
And the Democrat majority wasn't really that interested in it. And he asked for a 20% cut in a lot of agencies. And then the governor wanted that in this emergency certification bill, and they wouldn't do it. So, that was a slap in the face to him. And he was just trying to make things more efficient and save money. And so now he vetoed $4 million because none of that stuff was necessary. Again, it may be valid. Mm-hmm. They may be good projects, but they need to go through the process, and they didn't.
Okay, so the governor's certainly breaking with his own party and saying that it doesn't think that these things are not bad things, but that he wasn't ready to fund them. So what happens now, Jimmy?
Right, and they were very worthy things. You know, you had a VFW hall, you had anti-hunger agencies, so there was definitely some important things, but the way that it was put into the bill, it really is more about the process than where the money was actually going to. And so the governor has said it's really about this legislation that he wants passed, that if you're going to put earmarks through, we know who they're going to, there's tracking, there's a real transparency with all these earmarks now. So I think it's possible that you see them come back around.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that. Meantime, speaking of regulations, we said this would happen on this show. We've certainly done a lot of reporting about the captivity cases in Connecticut, from Jacqueline Torres Garcia in New Britain to the man in Waterbury who set a fire to get out of his house after he says his stepmother kept him there for 30 years. Both of those children were homeschooled. It seems that there is an appetite now for homeschooling regulations. One idea would be that if you are going to homeschool your children, there'll be a notification to DCF. Some people are very up in arms, even calling it a constitutional violation to do that. Give us your take on this homeschooling bill and if it's going to pass.
Well, just to remind our viewers, we have very, very broad homeschooling laws in Connecticut, almost none.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to the point,
one of the least regulated in all of the nation.
To the point that if I want to take my child out of the Woodbridge school system, it's only recommended I let the school system know. I don't even have to do it. If I don't want to. I mean, which I think most people understand that we should at least know where these kids are. So this particular bill, there's other versions of this, and I'm sure this version will change a few times before the end of session if it ends up passing, saying that if you take your child out of a school, withdraw to take them home to homeschool, that school district within 2 days has to let the State Department of Education know. And then the State Department of Education has to then let DCF, the Department of Children and Families, know. If DCF has a file open in your name, meaning there's been an issue,
right, you're already having DCF
They have to put a note in the file, and then no further action. If there is not a file, then also no further action. I think it's very open-ended. I mean, I think that if somebody's taking their child out and they already have a DCF case, I mean, I think at the very least that should trigger at least a conversation with the parents. But but the homeschooling parents don't like this at all because they don't want anything. And I certainly support some people's right to homeschool if they choose, but I think there has to be at least some parameters around it. And as far as the unconstitutional, I think that is one of the biggest stretches I've ever heard. I mean, I don't think there's anything unconstitutional about that.
Speaking as a lawyer. Yeah. Okay, so Jimmy, does it seem like this has been a very strong lobby, the homeschooling lobby, who doesn't want any restrictions? Given what's happened with these two criminal cases, is there an appetite now to do something? Do you see some legislation happening?
I think so, and as we've talked here, this is just about people not falling through the cracks. You know, you want to make sure that students are doing at least two things during the day, that they're learning and that they're safe at school, whether they're at a public school, private school, or even being homeschooled. And parents, guardians have that right to put their children through whatever schooling that looks like for them, but that they're safe and that they're learning. And so there could be a lot more measures that are being proposed. All this is saying is that there's just a bit more coordination, that if you take your students out, or that if you do homeschool, that the Department of Education is just going to check that with DCF to make sure that there's no one who's vulnerable that is falling through the cracks. We saw two horrible cases last year. This doesn't need to happen. Many other states, most other states, have much more strict regulations. All we're saying is a touch point for that coordination that ultimately benefits the student.
And remember, we as a government have made the determination that until you're 16 years old, it's our responsibility to educate you. Right, so that means as government in a public school, you can choose to go to a private school if you want. If you want to choose to homeschool, we still have that obligation to make sure you're being educated. So there's got to be something that tells us, okay, well, they're safe, they're learning something. Right. You know, to just say they're taking them out and never doing anything again, you never to see them again is kind of irresponsible. Since it's our obligation.
Interesting that, right, our border state, Massachusetts, they have way stricter rules than we do. Also in the news today, and that'll be coming up later as we report on this, but the complaint now as they're starting to sue DCF, saying that DCF, dropped the ball in the captivity case in Waterbury. So we'll see how this all goes. But I know you have said before this is a very strong lobby, and much like other lobbies where they don't want any wiggle room.
I mean, in my time in the legislature, with all the important issues we've had, death penalty cases, I mean, serious things. The most people I've ever seen at a public hearing is for homeschooling.
Is for homeschooling.
Law changes.
Wow. So another bill that's being talked about right now would change some abortion rules in Connecticut, that a parent would be notified, not consent, but that a parent would need to be notified if a minor is getting an abortion. Correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have that notification in place right now, right, Themis?
Correct. Neither. We don't have parental notification, and we do not have parental consent.
Okay. So on the surface, you might think, I want to know if my kids are in trouble, or this is, if my child is going to have an abortion. However, naysayers are saying it's often the parents that are the problem. So where do you see this legislation going?
Well, I mean, and these are bills that are put in annually. Every year
you've seen
a parental consent, a parental notification bill gets put into the legislature. It's not usually called. This particular one is just is parental notification, so the parent has to be notified. The argument is not that the parents are oftentimes the problem. I mean, there is the small circumstances where the parent caused the problem, right? But typically, we know you're 14, you're 15, you're 16. A lot of people are afraid to tell their parents. Now, ideally, we want them to tell their parents, right? We want these decisions to be made with an adult in a trusting situation, but every child doesn't have that. So the argument against it is we're going to have young girls that just do stupid things, right? Go to another state and get an abortion. It's not safe. It's not regulated. Doing something that they're not going to. And if they tell their parents, then if we have this law, then they're going to be. They talk about abuse and all different things. And it's a very hard question. I'll be honest with you, I have struggled with it for many years. Right now, we have mandatory counseling for minors. So if you go to, say, Planned Parenthood and you say that you would like to have this procedure, they have to counsel you. Okay. Right, so there is something there, but it's a very tough question. It's a very tough question.
Jimmy, do you see this getting reviewed, and what's the take from Democrats if there is one view?
Yeah, I don't see it being reviewed, because every year this does come up. There's no action taken, and even last year we actually put into the state statutes that young people can have access to these health services and that we don't need parental notification. So this is about the young person who may be in need of information, of care, perhaps an abortion, and it's really up to that young person. And the reality is that most times the young person does go and talk to their parent or talk to a guardian. But not every young person is blessed by a loving family or loving parents, and oftentimes you see what happens is that those that are in really difficult family situations, those that are very low socioeconomic, or those that are in the foster care system, they may not have that kind of parent or guardian. And so it really ends up hurting the most vulnerable who needs that access, and they don't have time on their side. They need some sort of urgent information and care. And so I think no action will be taken, because the laws that we've had on the books have been there for 36 years to allow young people the information and the services that they need here in Connecticut.
All right, let's leave it there because we've covered a lot. And this is the end of our time for the Capitol Rundown. Thank you for streaming live with us on WFSB Plus. You can watch the show 8 a.m. on Saturdays and anytime you want on WFSB.com. Click on local news, and you can also follow us, Themis Claridis, Jimmy Ticky, on social media, where we will continue to bring you conversation from both sides of the aisles. Thank you, insiders.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll be back on WFSB Plus with Great Day Connecticut coming up later on at 3.